Hi, welcome to the new episode of Startup Strikes. Today, my guest is Shim. He's a venture capital investor at Breega. Welcome, Shim.
Thanks for having me.
Really excited about this episode, Shim. I saw your resume. I mean, I took the liberty of stalking your LinkedIn. Obviously, very cool
Yeah.
LinkedIn. I'm really glad we got in touch and making this episode happen. Um, I like to keep the introduction short because I feel like I will not be able to do justice to the guest's background.
Yeah.
So before we start with the questions, per tradition, I have to ask you about your background in your own words. You have quite of a resume there. So can you walk us through it?
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah. And, yeah, for sure. So, I'm South Korean, born and raised there. And I left Korea when I was 11, moved to Malaysia. So studied in Malaysia for a bit, moved to London, studied maths at UCL. I thought I loved maths right up until the second week of uni. Then I realized I wasn't as smart as I thought compared to some of my peers at UCL. So then I started kind of looking for things to do, and I wanted to be kind of as wild as possible, coming from background of like my whole family being educators and lawyers and kind of very traditional as Asians would see as a career path. I wanted to do something quite different. And for me, that was like entrepreneurship. I was like, this is what I want to do. So I started a startup in kind of something I knew the best, which was education. So it was an ML-based platform designed for A-level IB students. We're selling the software to international schools across Southeast Asia. Obviously, this is prior to the kind of massive AI hype. So I think I had that kind of edge as well. Super cool journey. After that, I joined a venture arm of a family office called Samos Investments. Super cool fund. We're also looking at pre-seed to Series A. Got a taste of what it's like to be on the other side of the table. After that, as a South Korean, military service is mandatory. So I was back in Korea. I mean, initially I thought I'll get, office duty and so on. Ended up being pulled into quite a specialized unit called Korean Combat Training Center. There I specialized in mine deactivation and dismembering bombs. So yeah, that was my kind of main job for a year and a half. So there's a lot of kind of old mines and bombs that gets washed over. And yeah, that was kind of my main task to look after those. Post that, I joined Breega just over 14 months now as an associate. Yeah, and it's been fantastic, and that's been my journey. Wild couple of years up until now.
Yeah, genuinely, as so many things happen, and I already have like a few other questions around what you just said. And one of them is that like the venture capital, like I think the fund you mentioned was in Korea, right?
No, Samos Investments is based in London.
It's based
During
in London.
military, I part-timed at a different VC fund that
Got
was
it.
investing in Korea. Yeah.
Got it. Um, one thing, the military thing is always something that kind of stands out. I remember I had one founder a while back. It was from US. He was actually doing JD MBA at Harvard, and he was like a Army Ranger previously. Super cool guy, and it seems like there's a lot of like transferable things between that military mindset and actually like being a founder too. I mean, as a military person, you're managing risks, you're managing uncertainty. And in terms of high stakes, there are only few places where you can get even more high stakes than that, right? Um, what lessons from that environment and from that kind of, place transfer to venture and startup ecosystem well, and what don't really?
I think from a personal level, like just kind of outside of like VC as a whole, just as a personal level, you get a lot of things. I think one of the main things that I took away as a learning is like life could be worse. And the second one being that people don't die easily. So my first ever training was negative 37 degrees. In the top of on the top of the mountains, it was 6 days of no sleep. We didn't have a sleeping bag, no tents. And at that point you dig yourself into the snow because under the snow is warmer than the surface. And I genuinely thought that there were times where I was just like, oh my God, I'm not going to wake up tomorrow. um, but you kind of get through it. And I think that's the biggest learning, right? Like life could be worse and, we don't die easily. We find a way to survive as a human being. That's the kind of baseline that I approach every day now with. I think that's quite big. In terms of transferable skill with VC, uh, one of them being like risk discipline, I would say. Um, I was quite fortunate to be in a unit where everything had to be like strategy based. So we would try and predict the unpredictable, plan for those kind of niche case studies and so on. So, the assuming uncertainty throughout the army was kind of the baseline for me. And always planning for failure mode. So if we fail, what happens? What could go wrong was the baseline. And, as a VC, that a lot of times that's what you do, right? You meet a startup. Your job is to look for risks. Like, what are the risks with the startup? And I think that's quite important, and I thought that was quite transferable. Another one being decision making when you don't have the whole information, and you have to be quite comfortable with that as a VC, right? Because like you can never know the truth. Like no one knows everything, um, and I think as a as a soldier, that's something you have to go through because you as an individual soldier will never get a full picture. And you just have to learn to deal with uncertainties, and you have to make good decisions within that condition. Um, I will say though, not everything is very transferable. Um, for example, like military thrives on standardization. So
Mm.
everything needs to be ordered.
Oh,
Everything's
yeah.
like well organized into things, and there's like rules and like a strict structure, if you will. Startups don't work in that kind of over standardized sense. So that's something I had to kind of revert back to and like get myself back used to being exposed to. Um, yeah, and like other thing I say is military like reduces variance. As a soldier, your job is to eliminate variance, eliminate uncertainties, and try and get rid of it as much as you can. But I think for a good startup, you need to create more variables and create more uncertainties, especially early on, to actually reach that kind of top marks. I said those are my kind of key takeaways from the military.
You mentioned something really interesting. The variance thing, right? Which is very much right. Like it's all about conformity, right? Like that's how and maintaining the status quo. Um, but the really successful startups are the ones that are born in outliers, in being very different, in being going against the kind of the flow and and the status quo. You were in a very select, very different unit, so I think it might be a bit different for you. Um, do you think in that kind of environment you can still kind of maintain this innovative thinking and just because a lot of good innovation also comes from military, historically looking at it, right? Like, how do you, how does those two things reconcile with each other?
Think I mean, my unit, so Korean Combat Training Center, we specialize in training South Korean units and foreign units to co-op, and we act as a professional opposing force. So that could be, in most cases, that's North Korea for us. So we act as North Korean soldiers, and we have a training field that's just mountains after mountains, and it's 6 days of. I don't know if you play Call of Duty, but it's like real life Call of Duty. So we use real guns, we have jets, tanks, drones, any high tech devices
Wow.
that we can use. And our job is to simulate a real war scenarios and try and combat within that kind of situations. So we'll do that exercise maybe once a month throughout the year for a year and a half. Um, what we're exposed to is a lot of technology from the opponent side, because obviously as North Koreans, our technology is supposed to be quite limited in that sense. So we have to be very creative in how we're going to fight off them. Those kind of top innovations. And I think that's where kind of creativity kind of comes along. You have limited amount of soldiers. We are not fully aware of what the opponent is going to do or how they're going to react, but we come up with plan A, plan B, plan C to mitigate risk and try and come up with best strategies to attack them or defend ourselves. I think that's the kind of the fundamental basis of how military works. And because of that, I think innovation is embedded like ground up.
The limited resources and the constraints kind of push the innovative thinking.
For sure.
That's very interesting. And I do see parallels between that and kind of not raising way too big rounds because that having like small limited round pushes you to be more
Yeah,
creative what you can do.
for sure.
Let's bring, I don't even know how you go back from that to just being a normal civilian. That sounds so cool, by
I
the way.
mean, trust me, it took me a while because, like, as a soldier, you always have to take your hat off as soon as you enter indoors. One of the first things you're told is like you can't do more than one thing at a time. So if you're walking, you can't pick up a call. If you're
Mm,
walking, you can't be eating, you can't be drinking, you can't have your hands in the pocket because putting your hands in the pocket like doesn't
right.
work with walking. Like there's a lot of like these rules, and I think it took me good 3 months to get rid of the habits alone because like I'm so used to if I get a phone call, I'll stop, turn to a wall, and then pick up the phone.
Crazy.
If I buy something and I want to take a sip, I'll stop, go to the side, and then take a sip,
That's
and then keep
crazy.
walking because like it's embodied, and it's a year and a half of just doing that. So that took me a while, and like once again, I think that's when I realized like habits take a really long time to like get rid of.
That's crazy. Um, I guess I'm gonna bring you back to your early like the days. I think you did your undergrad before the military service, right? Which you studied maths. Maths is heavy on models, and you're very familiar with them. I'm pretty sure. VCs use models too, mental models, other financial models, etc.
Yeah.
Um, where do you think VCs over model the future, and where do you see they under model?
I think one thing in terms of like over modeling, I think one thing that comes to me right away is financial models. I think I like to go deep, and like I'm one of the guys who will probably overmodel. Like I spend a lot of times trying to study like all the possible scenarios and adjust for all the kind of assumptions and possibilities, and just like spend hours just looking at the model. But at the end of the day, my takeaway every time I do that is that it's impossible. Like you can't do it. Like like you're drawing like all the possible. Like you're set there like trying to be like Doctor Strange, like trying to come up with all these like different possible parallels that could happen. And I think that could be quite, I wouldn't say a waste of time, but it could be simpler. Like I think, especially super early on, like if they're just coming up with MVP, there's no reason for you to sit down and project their kind of next 5 years model when they don't have a clear ICP, they don't have a clear like go to market strategy. There's a lot of unknowns that you can't prepare for. So I think financial model, the predictions are one of the things that you do over model in that sense.
Got it. With you know what, quick question. You're good at maths. You're over model. What made you pursue venture capital, not private equity?
Ooh, that's a good one. I don't know. Like I think tech is still quite rare in like private equity, quite niche. I would say like that's one of the reasons why. Because like you think of like PE, you were thinking of like infra PE is the kind of probably a big one. Tech PE is still I feel like relatively niche. And also after being a founder, I just wanted to be in an environment where I have exposure to early stages. I think it's super cool. Kind of being able to work with people who are just so passionate about what they're doing. Um, yeah, and like I think I never thought it's a type of job I would love and I would fall in love with. But I think that kind of first 6 months at Samus Investments really taught me like, wow, like if my everyday could be like just meeting founders over and over again and listening to their life story, how they come about this idea or what their plans are, like I just thought that's probably the best job I could have because like I would actually enjoy it.
Mm, that's such a good point. I mean, the way you describe it, I want to become one right now. Um, I guess now I'm going to ask you more VC questions.
Okay.
Um, it feels like we are, just looking at LinkedIn, looking at reading the news. We kind of moving, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like we're moving from growth at all costs stage to fast but efficient scaling, like lean scaling, right? First of all, before I ask my follow-up question, do you agree with that notion?
I think I do. And I've been I want to say I've been waiting. Like 2025 was a lot. I think 24, 25's been kind of like growth at all costs. Like let's just scale, scale, scale. I've been quite scared, as I guess like we half the table would agree and the other half wouldn't. But realistically, I do see a bubble here, and I think to a certain degree, startups because we're not playing like 1 year, 2 year game. I think a lot of startups are realizing, okay, we're playing that kind of 10, 15, 20 year game. In that case, they need to be prepared and protected. So
Hmm,
I do agree.
you do agree. So with that in mind, how does that shift shape the way you help, the pre-seed seed founders you meet build their first infrastructure, their first idea, or like brings their idea into kind of like helps them brings their idea into existence? And what are the most common minds, going back to your military background, what are
Yeah.
the most common minds you see them kind of step on?
And I love the use of minds there. Uh, um, but yeah, like pre-seed founders need to set up the kind of infrastructure, if you will, earlier on. That doesn't mean kind of like in a sense that like corporate like bloats or so, but more of like paying attention to like what their retention rates are, margins, the CAC payback period, sales efficiency. And it all boils down to like paying attention to what ICP are you targeting? What pain point are you trying to solve? And would they pay for it? I think that's the kind of narrative that they really need to like think over and over again and nail down before just thinking about let's scale, scale, scale. I think those are the kind of points. And I think common minds, I mean, like as a founder, I've been on that side as well, like, trying to like, it's so exciting thinking about hiring more people and so on. So like, common minds, I think hiring the future organization too early. I think that's one thing. Like I've definitely had that kind of experience where I hired someone too early and like I knew I didn't need it. And it's a very difficult conversation to go back in, when you've convinced someone to, take the risk of joining me and, later is saying, look, it's not working out. It's a very difficult conversation, very difficult mistake to make, and an expensive one too for an early stage. The other thing I say is a lot of founders, when I do speak to them early on, they'll say, we have a wait list of like 10,000 people. Um, I think that's great. I mean, like it's great. I mean, as a founder, I'll be excited too, but I think you always need to take a step back and consider from the user perspective. You've created a fantastic tool. You're putting people on wait list because you want them to use your tool, and initially it's free. So if it's free, obviously people are open to using the tool because it's a great tool. But I think a lot of founders then confuse that kind of usage or like
Yeah.
people kind of being excited about the tool to kind of willingness to pay. I think those are two very different things. And I think you need to be ready to assess the willingness to pay very early on. Otherwise, your kind of whole strategy, go to market, your ICP can fall apart really quickly. Um, yeah, and the last one being, I'll say, kind of ignoring the implementation and change management layer. Um, I think a lot of people like, I have all these features. Like, this is a great tool, which is fantastic, and that's exactly what I get excited about. Like all these like really great tools, the tech itself amazing, but a lot of industries, like I'll say like legal as an example, construction is another good example. These are industries where actual implementations and like actually fitting into workflow matters a lot. And it matters a lot more than a lot of founders think.
Mhm.
So I think those are the things that I would consider from the get go. Like you need to understand how these people work internally, not just what they say, but like day to day, what do they click on and what do they move, what do they, produce tickets for? Like, I think that's a critical understanding to have like from the get go.
Such a good point. I think healthcare would be another one. They don't really care about shiny technologies. They want to know that it actually works, in their system,
Exactly.
and they're not going to be hallucinations or anything. And most people,
Yeah.
I mean, like explaining ChatGPT and kind of selling that is not that difficult. But when it becomes more complex, you really have to have like good conviction levels to get somebody on board with you, especially in those kind of legacy industries. One thing you mentioned really caught my interest about it's not just like interest because you're right. There's so many tools every day, and I feel like there's a bit of a tool fatigue too. Like there's so many tools for everything. Um, and you said, yes, there is interest, but it doesn't mean willingness to pay, right? Is there kind of like a framework you use or you assess on how you judge
Mm.
people, like the willingness to pay?
I think I don't necessarily have like a pricing method or like kind of a assessment tool I use to test out. The closest kind of assessment, if you will, I use is like how big is the pain point? Like how painful is the pain point? Like, is this something like, is it a kind of like, oh yeah, that'll be so cool if I did that? Or does this make someone jump off their seat? Like, oh my God, where do I sign up? Like, I need this today. Um, I need this today. I think that's the kind of signs I look for. And that's usually what I would do immediately after the kind of first call. If I get really excited about a tool, I'll try and reach out to someone I know in the industry or in that sector who works in that sector and kind of briefly explain about the tool. Like when, can you imagine just for a second in a world, like 6 months from now on, you have this tool available to you. Would you use it? Let's say there was a price tag on it. Would you use it? And I think I do like a micro survey within my network to see if the pain point is actually painful enough.
Is it becoming harder to find those companies? Because I feel like sometimes I see like a new, Anthropic or ChatGPT update kind of erases a startup like instantly, Uh, is it becoming harder to find some things that, oh my God, it's actually like solving something that is not being solved right now?
I would say last year it's been quite tough. I would say, just because like there were a lot of occasions we sat down and we're like, "Oof, is ChatGPT gonna launch a new feature tomorrow? What if GPT-5 comes out and it does this?" Um, but this year so far, it's been. I mean, it's been quite interesting. Like I've been loving my kind of conversation so far and been excited through like every call, and it does make my job much better just because, you know, if you're going on like 8, 10 back-to-back calls, and you're kind of constantly worrying about ChatGPT replacing them, as opposed to, oh my God, this is quite defensible. Like, oh my God, that's executed quite well. I think it just does make my job make easier, and yeah, that's been the case this year. So I'm super excited. I'm hoping it's. I mean, it is a still January sample size only, but I'm hoping this is a pretty good indicator of where the kind of uh, the ecosystem is headed at. And I think it makes sense, right? Like you look at last year, all the reports will say, the corporate like enterprise level tools haven't seen like a clear return on investment for their usage in AI and the spending in AI tools. So it makes sense all the startups coming now is focused on how do we actually ensure that these corporates and enterprises are getting the value back from the money that they're spending on these implementations.
Got it. I guess this is a nice segue into my next question where I feel like because like startups, I mean startups to be honest, right now everybody and their brother wants to do startup, right? Like it's there hackathons every day, there
Yeah,
entrepreneurship clubs. I mean, I was at Infield doing my master's. I am firsthand experience with that stuff.
yeah,
And I'm guilty of it too. I want to do something of mine as well. Like it's when you're in that environment, that's all you think about, right? Um, but I feel like because of that, this people are becoming more familiar with like how to build good decks, how to approach narratives well, storytelling well. And obviously AI demos is everywhere. Like there's AI added to everything. So it's very hard to
yeah.
know like, um how do you cut through that noise, in 2026 in today's market? And what signals do you trust and mistrust?
I would say that you're right. Like it's gotten so hard. Um, yeah, it has made our jobs much harder, right? Because everything on the surface looks super fancy, um, super exciting. It's super neat. Everything's kind of like standardized to a certain degree. Like they know what they're doing by putting the kind of working on something new on their profile, LinkedIn profile bio, or saying a founder, a stealth. They know exactly what they're doing. So it does make our job harder. The way to cut through it, we're still figuring out, right? Like we're still building our internal tools to be able to navigate that better. And the worst thing is like I don't think there is a way to cut through it. Like I think you just kind of have to kind of work with it, at least for the first call, right? So I'm learning as I go. Maybe there's a solution somewhere out there. And if you come across someone who has a solution, do let me know. But it's been tougher. And I think because as a VC, like, and especially Breega being a generalist fund, um, I take a lot of meetings across different sectors. So it just means getting busier, writing that extra email. Like I think with a couple of interactions and in-person calls, like or like actual video calls, like you can very quickly tell something's off, or if it's all a kind of a shiny cover, or if they actually have something valuable. So I think it's just a matter of like spending time talking to them and reaching out to them and actually starting a conversation as opposed to just looking at a deck and saying yes or no. So I do spend that kind of extra effort to make sure that I'm speaking with them, or at least touching base with them, if you will.
That's actually very interesting because, y- I just realized I want to ask this question because of what something you said is, you said it's that extra call, extra conversation, even meetings I'm in person. Obviously, there's also like a lot of new kind of technologies to review decks, or like automating VC analyst work. And to me personally, I feel like, I mean, I might be very wrong, but I feel like VC is such a like human thing. Like, you can review a very beautiful deck and give it a nice score, but at the end of the day, I feel like you really have to, like, I know how much do you agree with automating VC analyst work essentially?
I think analyst, I think this is its kind of tricky part, right? Because like as an analyst, you're still learning.
Hmm.
So a lot of the training is based on, understanding the business model. But the other side of like, as you said, the kind of human part of things, you're also learning like how to identify kind of founding team dynamics, how to understand what makes a strong founder. You're still, building the internal database like in your head of like, okay, this is a good quality to have as a founder. This makes sense for this kind of sector and this type of founders. Um, so yeah, to a certain degree, yes, analysts could be replaced to a certain degree, just because they're in a training period, right? And these tools are out there to help speed things up. So as I guess like from a, if I were to look at it from like a partner's perspective or like principal's perspective, like to a certain degree, it could be. But once again, I think as of today, with the technology we have, one thing we can't figure out is judging based on experience and judging based on human aspect of things. And when VC funds hire someone, and I still do believe that this is the truth, and I think they bring someone because they value their experience and what opinions that they have built based on their experience. And that's a unique quality as an individual that a lot of tools can't have, because it's not as simple as just automating and like pulling on the database and then just saying what's right and what's wrong. It's more of like from their experience, what do they bring to the debate table? If we have an opportunity and as a team we have to discuss this, can you offer a perspective that we don't have exposed to on the table? And I think I would say that's the strongest like defense for not being able to replace analysts.
Yeah. And like, how do you even automate intuition, right? And I feel like intuition is one of those
Exactly.
sayings that
Exactly.
is very much intrinsic to VC work. With AI, we touched upon it that it's insanely the fastest growing startup. Like every week, I feel like I'm hearing the fastest growing startup, the insane ARRs. Nobody's really talking about retention, which is like I feel like was used to be a
Yeah.
very important factor. Um,
Yeah.
but also I feel like that kind of talking points and conversation changed the whole dynamic of fundraising as well. Like expectations from VCs, expectations from
Hmm.
like which number you have to hit to raise certain number by what point, and we're not really in traditional SaaS era anymore. Um, with the speed, the massive error expectations and everything else, how have, it better because you're in the ecosystem, the fundraising norms and the expectations shifted from C to Series A and beyond?
First and foremost, like it's been crazy couple of years, right? Like, I mean, we're seeing like hundreds of millions in pre-seed stage. I just don't know how it's happening, and how it makes sense for investors either. But yeah, I mean, AI has been like insane in terms of how it shifted how investors interact with founders, startups, and value companies. Um, I think one thing for sure is AI definitely has sped up the process, or at least the capacity of the team. So prior to AI, if you will, you will have a team of co-founders at pre-seed, and by seed stage they'll have maybe 20 people. Fast growing ones will have like 25, 30 people, and then by Series A you're looking at three digits. Like people needed number headcounts to make things work and make growth work, and that's tough because you're training individual person that's joining the company, and you're trying to at the same time build your company but also build a culture within the company so that people are all motivated, they share the vision. So it's a lot, as a founder, it's a lot to balance. Whereas now, you don't need that many people to have the same uh, capacity. There are sales tools that are available to you, customer relationship management tools that are available to you. There's marketing tools that are available to you. So as a very early stage founder, your engineering team could be smaller, your marketing team could be smaller, your sales team could be smaller. So at the end of the day, like you're working with smaller number of people. You're moving fast because you don't have to train these people. They just have extra capacity, which means you don't have to work on spreading the culture, sharing the vision. These guys already share the vision with you. They've been spending time with you. So I think kind of combination of all of those have helped AI companies like scale faster. So that's for sure. Um, yeah, and I think speed has been the kind of keyword around AI, right?
How do you, as a VC, then, compare to when these startups are getting these insane numbers for seed, and especially even from the return point, right? It's becoming kind of like hard to even imagine, like if you raise 100 million seed, how are you going to get the returns later on? And later rounds, if you have the brand name, Anderson Horowitz, you have the money,
Yeah,
you can buy into the round, right? uh,
yeah.
with obviously a lot of startups, but quality startups tend to be only a limited number, obviously. um, so from a VC perspective, like not only founders compete, but also VCs compete too. So what's your take on that? Like, how do you compete for these good startups?
I mean, I agree. I mean, it's been a tough game, like trying to understand the dynamics, right? Like, because of AI, the capital concentration. While we haven't seen we've been seeing like some recovery in kind of investments or capital invested, but the concentration is like just dedicated to the kind of top AI companies, and because they're getting all the attention and they become the safer bet. Their valuation is not something that we as an early investors can work with easily unless you have a different fund model. So yeah, it's a competition to get the kind of hidden gems, if you will. Uh, um, I think as a VC, like you need to think about what value you add. And I think traditionally, just the kind of based on the background of like VCs, traditionally it's usually consultants, investment bankers. Uh, but I do see a shift in that. Like, I think Europe is following the kind of US model where you have more founders or ex-founders or entrepreneurs on the kind of investor side. And Breega, I think from that side has been superb. Like our entire investment team is ex-entrepreneurs. Um, and we have an in-house scaling team. That's quite valuable as well. Beyond the kind of introductions and capital, we also offer actually hands-on support to actually walk them through challenges and tough times and navigating different things. Everything I mentioned, from like building cultures, hiring new talent, optimizing and automating your sales flow, your hiring process. I think all of that becomes quite valuable to founders, especially in the day and of age, in the day and age of AI, just because so many tools, founders don't have time to review everything, test out everything. So, as a VC, just day to day spending that time trying one more tool here and there, it does add up. And in terms of making recommendations for tools.
Breega is actually, yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, is a French VC fund, right? The based
Well,
out of
we're pan European VC.
pan-European, but
Yeah,
headquartered in France.
headquartered in Paris. Yeah,
Yes, yes. It is a very fascinating VC fund. I mean, as you said, there's quite a bit of an operator mindset there. Backed quite many category-defining companies, um, and I guess from that standpoint, it was the shift we're moving from the horizontal LLM era to more vertical, industry-specific AI age. Um, how do you think about you know, mods today, right? Is the winner today the company that has the best proprietary data set, like in biotech, you might see, or is the one that integrates most deeply into the, messy legacy workflows, the ones that we mentioned, like the law, the construction, the logistics, the
yeah.
healthcare?
I think my personal opinion is that my personal bet is integration. I think at the end of the day, the buyer has to feel the need, and buyer needs to understand that it's a tool that makes their lives easier. So I think at the end of the day, the workflow integration wins all the way. People don't have the patience to even go on Google and click through to page 2, page 3 anymore, let alone like going to like separate like research part to figure something out. Like people are being to a certain degree lazy because of AI. Um, and because of that, I think integration is the one that matters the most, right? Like if you have a fantastic tool with the best set of data available, and it gives you the best quality of like information you need. But if it requires 3 extra clicks to get that information, they're not going to use it. It's
Yes.
people are not going to use it. Plus, I think data is going to be quite easy to access moving forward. We have a kind of recently had a big player, Prataj, that raised a pretty big Series A in the US. I think there's going to be a data provider layer that's going to be introduced, and that's going to be quite big. I mean, that's what the Cloudflare acquiring Human Native was also about. I think there's a lot of big efforts of these players making data more accessible and kind of more easily integratable. So yes, like data set could be valuable and it will be valuable for sure. But as for successful AI companies, I think the workflow integration still wins because it creates the switching costs, it embeds into day-to-day operations. It's what the buyers will be interacting with. And I think that matters more than the data part.
Shim, this is a more personal question because when I think of this legacy, messy workflows in industries, I imagine quite, like obviously it's like we think of manufacturing, construction, logistics, like very quite boring most of the time, quite complex, quite old school. Um, how do you show up as a young founder, telling this older executives, hey, like, this is how we're going to do it now? Or do you think those industries still want to see somebody who's been in the space for quite a bit of time, who know the in and outs of like the sector, this
Yeah.
manufacturing executive that's been working in the same space for 20 years now wants to start his own startup? Is that
Yeah.
the expectation?
I mean, you're right. I mean, it's a tough question. But I think like places like construction, like it's a very, very relationship driven industry. So honestly, I don't think I guess age does play a part. But at the end of the day, it's a question of like, can you sell your products? Like, are you a likable person? Can you build a relationship? I think it goes back to like fundamental human kind of basic questions that we have. I mean, for reference, I mean, construction is a nightmare, right? Like these guys still do everything over the phone. So when I was doing a deep dive, I was like, literally, why not study the actual like workflow? I went onto the construction site during my lunch break and started talking to the guys there and just asking questions on like, okay, like what are you guys doing here? Like, what do you do? How do you report? Like all this stuff. These guys are doing it over WhatsApp. And then their site managers then picking up everything from WhatsApp and then putting it into nice kind of report and then sending it to someone in the office, and they'll then remake it into something, and like back and forth on WhatsApp, like very relationship driven. And like it's how do you crack into that is like just being a likable person and having a good product. What you mentioned about kind of being a young founder entering into kind of pretty mature sectors. I think one language that everyone speaks is return on investment. You need to be clearer than ever on, by using Soul, you'll save X amount, and this will be your benefit in a couple of months. And I think that plays a big part in actually initially building that relationship.
Interesting. Um, I guess in terms of two sectors that I want to ask questions about because I've seen them on your profile, is deep tech and fintech, and then Breega is a generalist fund. So as you said, you're exposed to startups across many different industries and sectors. Deep tech has seen deep tech is one of those few areas where I'm fascinated by. I love deep tech and I love biotech, deep tech, and I think it's seeing application of AI in science and technology is such a fascinating thing, right? Um, it has seen a significant acceleration, even in Europe, right? Like the Proxima Fusion, the Cusp AI, I believe, is also both in the number of startups being founded, but also like in the size of rounds being raised. Before you would see this large funding rounds being mostly led by the US funds, but now you see like the European VCs leading the rounds as well. How has that changed the way you analyze and evaluate deep tech startups and deep tech founders?
I think first and foremost, I'm a huge believer in European deep tech. I think it's the kind of next big thing for Europe that can potentially compete against the US. I do believe, and yeah, I think deep tech is always a really fascinating one for me because there's always so much to learn about. And I think as an investor looking at deep tech, you cannot know everything. There's so many niche little things that you can build like next generation technology on. So that's the beauty of deep tech. You know for a fact everyone's studying every day just to be able to understand even a little bit the highlights of a high level summary of these companies and what they're trying to do. So it does humble me a lot whenever I speak with deep tech founders, and I think that's so crucial as an investor to be in that mindset of like I can always learn one extra thing every day. Um, but yeah, I'm kind of, I think with deep tech, I've made a lot of mistakes, kind of falling for getting excited for the tech itself. Just kind of like, oh my god, like these. I mean, we have Ellis and Bob in our portfolio company. Exotech is also a company that we have, and we just invested in a couple more super exciting that we will hopefully soon announce. But yeah, these technologies, these companies had two things, in my opinion. I think that's the kind of key to deep tech, right? Like you need incredible science that just kind of blows your mind. And like, wow, how is that possible? On the other side, you need the execution side of things. Like, is this actually uh, required? Is there a pain point that they're trying to solve? Or is it just a really cool tech? Like, I think good example that one of a investor friend of mine used on me was that, for example, tomorrow, if a founder comes to you and say, "Dude, I just created the first ever fully functional Iron Man suit," like yes, that's very cool. I'm personally very interested, but we need to decide on the use case. Like, what is your use case? If there's a defense angle, then sure, that it becomes a very valuable product. But if it's a consumer product for fans of Iron Man's, that all of a sudden becomes less interesting and less valuable in that sense, because not many people they'd be able to pay 10 grand for an Iron Man suit just to have it in their garage for once a month trials. So yeah, I think the execution part matters a lot. Um, yeah, like I whenever I'm evaluating deep tech, I'm looking at engineering milestones and dependencies. I think those are the two critical ones. Time to shippable product is another thing. Regulatory and manufacturing realities, once again, and talent is another big one. Like, do we have the talent, or do they have what it takes to get the right talent onboarded? Because typically, like fusion space, quantum space, there's limited amount of experts who've spent enough time to know and have an actual impact when joining a company early on. Um, and because there are more and more startups in that space, there's so many limitations on like actually acquiring the right talent.
Deep tech is, I agree. I think Europe has an edge, especially because there's very good talent, but also it's not as expensive as in US. But you're right. It's not just about the technology being amazing, but it also needs to be like commercially viable, right? And I think that's where like the deep tech can be, and you can really pivot easily. You can just come up with one product and then just change to fit um, and the timing is very important, which is I'm going to ask you a very quick and abstract question. I mean, there's not really I don't think there's a good answer, like any good answer to it. But fusion technology 7 years ago maybe wouldn't have been as big
Yeah. Yeah.
like now, because the market was right, the timing was right. And you
Yeah.
see some investors, they got it. They find as they get in the just right time. Uh, what's the secret? How do you time the deep tech market?
I mean, if you know the answer, do let me know. It's very tough. But I think it all goes back to like understanding your like fundamental science, right? Like fusion's been around for almost a century. Like it's not a new concept. Um, it's just that it just takes time for the theoretical science to be realized. And there is a kind of, you'll start to see a hint of like progress where, okay, I can kind of see it working. And like fusion, like realistically, is still far away, right? Like we might still be like kind of 10 to 15 years away at best, from actually seeing like a working fusion, uh, generated energy being distributed across the globe. There's an obvious issue with grid connection. Like there's a lot of issue to be solved on top of that. So it's incredibly hard to time it right. And I think it all just comes down to you actually understanding technology and understanding what's available out there, because you need to time the technology, the science, as well as the infrastructure around it that enables that technology to be used globally.
Mm,
So yeah, it's once again just kind of heads down, go back to your textbooks, do your research.
fair enough. Shim, I personally am a born generalist, right? Like I studied biochemistry in my undergrad. I did my master's in business related stuff. My hobby is reading history and politics, you know. Um, I love being a journalist. I think it makes life interesting and cool, right? Um, but from a VC perspective, when you're exposed to so many different fields and sectors, how do you manage to navigate this learning, but also judging effectively when you're exposed to so many different ideas and so many different
Yeah.
sectors?
This is like a $1 million question. I think every VC investor you probably have spoken to and will speak to will say, I just don't have enough time to do my research. And that's one thing I'm super valuable. So I initially joined Breega as a research associate. So I took a step back from direct investing role because as an investor early on, I felt this like I had this like huge imposter syndrome. Like, who gave me the right to sit in front of this super qualified individual building their dream and tell them your go-to-market strategy isn't working? I felt a I had like massive imposter syndrome. Who gave, like, I'll go to bed and like, I'll be like, who gave me the right? Who gave me the right to crush this person's dream? Um, but yeah, like as I worked as a research associate for almost a year, and I think that just kind of gave me the time I needed to build, really have the time to deep dive into all these like niche verticals and build my opinions all across, which is why today I feel much comfortable. But to maintain that, I mean, I spend a lot of my free time just reading and studying. And I think that's the kind of hard part of VC is like, if you want to understand the technology, you will have to spend the time. Um, Obviously there are people who build their opinions and learn from like individual calls day to day, but I prefer to build my opinion, at least some level of opinion, before I speak to a founder. So I mean, my weekends look like just kind of reading all these kind of different technologies and picking a sector and deep diving in. And I think it's helped me a lot to become a better journalist. Obviously, it's still a long way to go. And the beauty of it is like it never stops, right? Because there will be always new company to study and always new technology to study. But yeah, it's just like spending that extra minute speaking to an expert, spending that extra hour reading that article, and I think it all adds up.
So you're forever in school, essentially. You just constantly have to.
Precisely,
Fair enough.
precisely.
Fintech is another thing you've had interest and investments in. Um, Fintech is always an exciting sector. There's always money there. Now the prediction markets are exploding, as we know. But from Revolut to neobanks to prediction markets to the infrastructure layers to Venmos, etc. Money never disappears. It just kind of moves layers, right? Uh, where are you seeing the next wave of fintech value is being created? Is it consumer interfaces? Is it B2B infrastructure? Is it embedded finance or something at the intersection of like quantum finance or something? I don't know. You tell me.
I'm personally a huge believer in a prediction space.
Mm.
I'm super excited about it. You ask anyone at Briga, they'll vouch for me on this one. But in terms of kind of like overall fintech, I think compliance, fraud, treasury automation, I think these are the spaces that I see kind of a huge value up this year at least. I think there's a lot to be automated. that are very tricky to automate. Um, so yeah, once again, going back to the kind of return on investment, it doesn't only have to be very good, but it also needs to show why the investment is worth it. And I think given that everyone's been trying to crack these layers, this year, I think we'll see more of them actually being able to crack the enterprise sale and going into that kind of big banks and having those big logos. And I think we've had enough time with the technology around to a point where enterprise and banks will be more open to testing out and building based on these new technology. Embedded finance is an interesting one, but they need like a proper distribution layer, I think, even better than before, and kind of stronger unit economics, even once again stronger than before. I think there is still a space for embedded finance, and I think once again it's going to be a pretty big year for embedded finance. But I think they really need to crack down the distribution and unit economics. Last thing I'll mention is cross-border rails. Um, I think personally, I've come across maybe like 20 different cross-border rails and real-time settlement tools available. Um, because there's so many corridors that's not covered today yet. Like if I were to send money from UK to South Korea, even today, like it could take, I mean, Revolut does it pretty well, but it's still quite expensive. It's not as quick sometimes. And for example, Vietnam from UK or Korea to Vietnam, like it's just impossible. Like Vietnam is one of those places you still need to go somewhere, give them cash, receive, and then they travel to different country. Like there's a lot of that going on, and of course, not to mention the kind of Africa as a continent as a whole. Like it's a big issue there, and I think this year, hopefully, is the year someone cracks that layer. Um, uh, and yeah, you mentioned consumer side of things. I think it could work, but I think it's getting tougher. And I think they really need the huge, like massive wedge beyond just having like paid ads somewhere. Like,
Mhm.
I think
Mhm.
there's a lot. I think it needs to be a stronger product to be able to pull the consumers to be on board. Just because there's so many tools available already. Like
Mhm. In terms of, I guess, geographies, right? Maybe fintech would be there too. You said deep tech is where Europe has an edge. Other sectors where you feel that way about Europe?
I think fintech, I think, is still really strong in Europe. I think that's one thing that's very, very, very different from the US. Um, it's like essentially it's a fundamentally different ecosystem, right? Like US is all about like speed and like having a single, it's a single market at the end of the day. So it's about like just being quick, and they have so much capital to support that speed. It makes sense. Certain things make sense, whereas Europe is like super fragmented. There's heavy regulations, and you're trying to please so many different markets at the same time. But what it's good at is building defensibility. So, for example, like Cash App is a good example of what works in the US that didn't work in Europe, right? Cash App came to the UK, they just couldn't get people interested because we already had Monzo, Revolut, like these players in place that took their time to actually build and build trust. So when a player from the US comes in, all of a sudden it's not as attractive to consumers for obvious reason of it being um, kind of less kind of commonly used, I guess is a way to put it. While it takes longer, I guess the defensibility becomes stronger in Europe. So fintech, I think, is a big one as well. I think health, energy, mobility, like these are all kind of things I'll say. Anything regulated, I think, is quite defensible and quite strong across Europe. Even if there's an American player, I think it will take them just probably the same time for them to land and expand across Europe. Industrial and climate players are, I think, another one that's quite strong in Europe as well. Privacy and security layer, for obvious reason, I think Europe wins this one. Um, and yeah, I think anything that makes it like a bit more regulated and regulatory heavy, I think US companies will struggle to build in Europe or scale in Europe. Because of that, I think there's still a huge advantage in these sectors for Europe. That is.
So what I'm hearing is actually that the things that Europe gets criticized for, the fragmentation, the regulation, the all this kind of like constraints actually end up being an advantage in the long run in a way.
I think so, and I believe so, and I think that's the beauty of it. Like, right, like because there's so many little bigger problems and like bigger hurdles for them to go through. I think in the long run, it makes them stronger, and I think more sustainable in a long game of venture.
Got it. And we talked about startups quite extensively. And obviously everybody's buzzing with the as we talked about, like the ARRs, etc. But at some point, you have to think about exits too, right? Um, Before it seemed like, obviously being an IPO, acquisition and stuff is was kind of like very clear. That was the stage. Now I feel like you're seeing a bit more creativity in terms of like how
Yeah,
liquidity happens, right? You see more
yeah,
secondaries, you see more creative M&As, you see fewer IPOs or IPO bust stories. As an early stage investor, how's your, first of all, what's your thought on what's happening in the exit strategy wise? And how do you advise founders about the way, the way you advise about the exit, how has it changed essentially?
yeah. I mean, there's no beautifying this. Like exit's been super tough. And as like, kind of going back to the army stories, like when things are tough, like it makes people super creative. And people will find a way to get things done. And I think that's what we've been seeing recently, the kind of blowing up in secondaries market, super creative ways to do M&As early on. Equihire has been kind of picking up really fast recently. But yeah, fewer IPOs. So I think people stop seeing like exit as like a one single moment of truth, but more of like a layered sequence of things happening. So not everyone gets to kind of go out at the same time, but more of like tiered system of people exiting at different stages of the company, even at early on. And secondaries is such a strong tool, right? Especially for early team members, early investors, and it's really useful like for like cap table health as well. Like being exit ready is a term that people would use, and cleaning up your cap table is one of the kind of ways to get ready for PE funds to come in and buy you out. So yeah, I think that I've seen like I think from partner levels, I've seen a lot of kind of advice shift from kind of typical IPO build
Yeah,
exit
yeah.
to like I think building optionality and kind of multiple buyer types, exploring multiple buyer types has been one of the advice that I've seen. And I think another one is always staying acquirable, even if you're not on sale. I think that's another big thing, right? Like regardless of like what happens, you don't know what the market is going to be tomorrow.
Mhm.
Obviously, we have a couple of big people in the US that just can just turn the world upside down with a tweet. So yeah, like I think always staying acquirable early on, I think is super useful, and I think I do echo that advice that I've been hearing. So just having your metrics clean, having the kind of security and compliance layer kind of ticked off the box, kind of maintaining your contract relationships and governance. I think it all plays a big part in presenting your startup to be acquirable and staying acquirable.
Fascinating advice. It's actually really cool. We covered a lot of things, a lot of ground. Very interesting episode. Very cool insights. Hopefully you enjoyed my questions. I'm going to ask you one final
Yeah, for sure.
last question. If we sit down in 2030, 2035, right? Which of today's hot sectors, this might offend somebody, but hopefully it doesn't, do you think will be seen as kind of historical footnote? And which boring sectors that you're looking at today will essentially become the backbone of the future global economy?
I think like going back to like, I mean, like once again, like I think the beauty of VC is that no one, owns the truth, right?
Yeah,
So I'd love to kind of wait in 5 years, go back and watch this again and see how much of what I said was correct and
well, I
how
will delete
much
your
of the
episode. Don't
truth.
worry. I will delete your
Yeah,
episode.
yeah,
Don't
for
worry.
sure. I'll set a reminder on my calendar. Yeah. Um, but yeah, I think this it's going to be the year of not the year of. I think we're going to see a couple of years of like pretty like boring sectors picking off. I think we've had enough of the kind of super flashy technology. We've had a crypto hype, and then we rode the AI hype, and I think we've been seeing a lot of exciting stuff, and a lot of rappers, as they say, the speed is the mode. They would say, I think we're gonna see the end of that, hopefully, and I think we're going to see some more boring sectors taking off. We talked about the compliance, security, risk infrastructure. Um, and I think because given the kind of current state of things, we're going to see more regulations and compliance coming in from the government. And the startups that are building to prepare for this regulatory push and compliance push are going to be the winners. That's my personal belief as of today. More recently, I'm looking at I've been looking at water space. We're running out of clean
For
water.
sure.
The demand's expected to exceed the supply. Um, this is an evident problem that we're going to have in the future, and governments are clearly putting efforts into have regulatory infrastructure and compliance processes for companies to comply. This is for me is a gold mine, right? Like if you're building and you're the right player building in this space, like this is as long as you have the right team and right product, like the push of the market is like on your side. Like governments will feed you money and clients to make sure that you're out there and in front of them. And I think for the coming years, I wanna make sure that I'm backing those companies and those startups and those founders who are building in that like typically what we would consider as boring sectors, um, to ensure our ecosystem is found well grounded at least, because we need that phase in order to make sure that we can build the next phases of like incredible technology and amazing exciting technology. And I think it's a bit of a cycle, but I think we're entering the cycle of guys, let's fix this from ground up. Let's make sure we have a really good foundation before we go any further. And I think I love to spend the next few years making sure I see a lot of those companies, and we're hopefully backing a lot of those companies as well.
We're coming full circle, huh?
Yeah.
Shim, it's been a fantastic episode. Genuinely, really,
Likewise.
really enjoy the vibes, enjoy the answers, everything. Thank you so much for your time, and with the hopes of remaining in touch.
Yeah. Likewise. Super cool. I love the questions. Yeah, it was just a great conversation. Great way to end the Monday.
Have a good one.
Have a good one.